Good afternoon, and let me welcome you to this panel and panel discussion. I'm Peter Haas. I'm chair of the Department of Religious Studies, and it so happens that the two dead authors are both in my department, so that's one of the reasons I'm here. The other is that I'm chair of the Faculty Senate Committee on University Libraries. The university libraries here at CWRU have seen as one of their missions to become sort of the center or the point of contact for various changes going on in the publishing world more generally. Issues of copyright, which obviously we will be addressing in a few minutes, but issues of open access, electronic publishing, various different models for publishing, acquisitions, access to books of various kinds. The library has had a series of these kinds of meetings and seminars and presentations over the last few years. So this is really part of an ongoing effort of the library to bring to our campus these kind of issues and make them available to faculty, staff, students, and keep the university campus informed about changes, very rapid changes going on in the publishing world in general. Let me say just a few words about the three people up front. Ray Koo is professor at the School of Law here, and he will act as moderator for the program. Timothy Beal is professor in the Department of Religious Studies, as I said, who teaches Bible, but also popular religion and popular religious culture in America. William Deal is also in the Department of Religious Studies, really focuses on Buddhism, but also on ethics more generally. As you all may know, the very basic story, are you going to explain the story? So you'll hear the basic story. What we've put on your chairs is a comparison of the original book for which they signed the copyright to the publisher, and then the second book that came out in the series, so that you can actually have some of the rather startling evidence in front of you. But with that, let me turn the floor or the mic or the table over to Professor Koo, and we can get underway. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Welcome to The Death of an Author, a publishing horror story, right? I had to say, when I first saw the title, I was a little taken aback by it, but thankfully, I was reminded of Mark Twain, and I can quite clearly say that the reports of their death are clearly exaggerated, as both Tim and Bill are here, both in good health, and more importantly, actually, after you hear this astonishing story, they're here triumphant, right? They are ultimately the victors in this tale. As a professor of copyright law, I think this story is really important for a whole bunch of reasons, especially for our community, but not because it's unique. In many ways it is, but also because it's representative of many of the problems that we as authors are facing today. This story is a perfect illustration both of the power and the limits of law, in particular copyright law, and either our understanding or lack of understanding of what actually copyright gives to us as authors and gives to publishers in terms of their rights of use. And more importantly, the importance of social norms like plagiarism and the enforcement of those social norms, even when the law doesn't kind of provide us any clear rule or guidance. But you didn't come here to listen to me talk, so we're going to keep this informal, and we'll take questions at the end of the discussion. So let me introduce Tim and Bill and let them tell their story.
Thank you. I'll go first. I think the idea is to tell the story and to unpack it a little bit, think a little bit more deeply about it, and let that story be an occasion for a larger discussion about a lot of these issues. So we'll make sure that we leave plenty of time for that. So the title, The Death of the Authors? Great Agatha Christie novel title. It would have been, I don't think she did one like that, but a great murder mystery kind of title. Some of you might also recognize it as a phrase from Roland Barthes, a literary theorist, a French literary theorist, who wrote about the death of the author as a sort of theoretical concept, a way of talking about how authorial intentions maybe have to get let go of in some ways, and that a text really is released out into an intertextual space, and authorial intention gets detached from that in a way. Bill and I wrote about the death of the author in Theory for Religious Studies, and I thought I would just read a couple sentences. This is not the time to go into any detail about that concept, but just a couple sentences that I thought were interesting in this context. Here we write, with the death of the author, a text becomes untethered from its author such that the author can no longer be considered the transcendent source of meaning of a text and the authority for how a text must be interpreted. And then a little later we write, for Barth, then, all texts are intertextual. That is, they are embedded in a larger system of interrelationships among multiple texts existing within a cultural context. These texts, whether fiction or nonfiction, scientific or religious, whatever textual genre, are a part of every other text. And we go on from there. So others, though, have written about Roland Barthes' concept of the death of the author as well. And in fact, I have one right here. Philip Auslander, in Theory for Performance Studies, also wrote about the death of the author, and you should listen carefully. With the death of the author, a text becomes untethered from its author such that the author can no longer be considered the transcendent source of meaning of a text and the authority for how a text must be interpreted. And then he goes on later to say, for Barth, then, all texts are intertextual. That is, they are embedded in a larger system of interrelationships among multiple texts existing within a cultural context. These texts, whether fiction or nonfiction, scientific or religious, whatever textual genre, are a part of every other text. And he continues on from there. In fact, everything in between those two quotes is also identical. A couple, you might think of them as significant changes. The quote from Barth that precedes that first is indented here, whereas we have it in the main body of the text in ours. I think that was probably a copy editor change. And a comma was removed in a serial list. And again, this one was published in the UK. Ours was published in New York, so that may represent a copy editing change as well. So that's to say that a lot of this book, Theory for Performance Studies, is identical to our book, word for word, punctuation mark for punctuation mark. Probably, some have estimated around 80% or so of the text is actually word for word identical to ours. It doesn't seem like there's any a consciousness of, well, there wasn't much original writing in there, so it would be hard to tell, but much of an awareness of the irony of writing about the death of the author when you're copying and pasting it from another author and putting your name on it as the author. But there are some other evidences of some awareness of that, such as that in the suggestions for further reading, one of the main changes you find at the end of each of these sections is that any texts written by either of us that were in the suggestions for further reading have been removed from the lists. So, although some of you remember Jim Flanagan, our chair when Peter and I came, and Bill's chair for a long time in the Religious Studies Department, he had a piece in there related to Lefebvre that we had suggested for further reading, and he did get to stay. So, at any rate, so that's, I guess we've written about and thought about the death of the author in theory. It's quite another thing to experience it in this particular way. I don't know if I'd say in reality, because it's been a kind of unreal experience. But the idea here is to tell the story, talk a little bit about it. So I'm going to try to give a quick outline of that story and then hand it over to Bill, who's going to think into it a little bit more deeply with us, and then we'll open it up for conversation. So it started with an idea, as many books do. It was Bill's idea, really, first, and then we sort of developed it together for a book in academic religious studies that could work as a kind of supplement to standard textbooks for academic religious studies courses. There's one in religious studies called 8 Theories of Religion, and it introduces 8 theories of religion that are very important, prominent theories of religion by religionists, or those that we would consider in religious studies to be religionists. But yet there are a lot of theoretical perspectives that are important to religious studies that don't come from religionists. And the idea was to offer brief introductions to 25 theorists who have done significant things with regard to religion, but who are not religionists per se. So theoretical perspectives that are important to the study of religion, but that are coming from outside the field of religion, if that makes sense. That was our basic idea in the book. We came to an editor that I've worked with in the past as well, Bill Germano, really a pillar at Routledge, was a pillar at Routledge. He's no longer there. That's part of our story. But a great guy, and we came to him with this idea, and he liked it, and we developed a proposal and signed an advance contract for it. Then a year and a half later or so, we delivered a manuscript, and Bill Germano liked the manuscript very much, and we began, Bill and I, to have a conversation about whether there might be some potential for books like this in other fields. And the idea that developed was that this could be the basis of a series of books that would do similar things in other fields. Not that our words and our actual chapters would be in those other books, but that, this is a concept we had for this book, and there was a nice structure to it and a nice layout to it, and there would be, this could be something that would work for other fields as well. And so we ended up agreeing, before we had even gotten to proof pages yet on this one, that Routledge would develop a series of books by other authors based on this book, using this book as kind of a template, if you will, the basic idea and the structure. Some of the theorists that we use, Roland Barthes maybe, would be used in some of those other ones. We'd want to make sure that the biographical details and maybe even some of the key concepts would be consistent from book to book, so to maintain consistency and so forth. But since it was our idea, the idea was that they would be based on our book, that in return for that we would be credited in these other books, that it would be something like based on Theory for Religious Studies, or something like that by William E. Deal and Timothy K. Beal, and that we would get half royalties, so a quarter royalties each on these other books. And those of you who are not very familiar with academic publishing, we're not talking about a lot of money at all, maybe a couple $100 a year. But at any rate, that was the agreement, and we signed an addendum to our contract. Unfortunately, the addendum was very vague. It basically said Routledge can revise, supplement, add to, take away from our book in order to create a series of books by other authors based on our book. We clearly, Bill Germano, Bill Deal, and I all had the same understanding of what we were doing, and no one ever imagined that whole sentences, let alone paragraphs and chapters, would be copied and pasted from one to the next. And I think we've probably foolishly thought of ourselves as making a deal with an editor, not with a publishing company. So we signed that, and not too long after that, Bill Germano left Routledge, and this was a scandal at the time. It was in the Chronicle of Higher Education. Bill Germano has been really an important figure at Routledge for many, many years, and I've worked with him in the past, and we enjoyed working with him on this. He's really, we trusted him then, and I think we both would definitely trust him now. But he left, and basically what we can gather happened is that the contracts for these books just were distributed to the editors in the particular fields in which they were going to be published. At least some of these authors must have gotten whole files of our document, Word document or something like that at some point. And that was the last we we heard about it for a long time. A couple years later, we realized that 3 books had been published: Theory for Education, Theory for Art History, and Theory for Performance Studies. We hadn't seen any of them. Bill happened to get one in the mail, Theory for Performance Studies, and when he opened it, it was a complete shock. You can see, this is what he saw on the front page, basically changing first-person plural into first-person singular. And adding a little bit here and there to the introduction, but for the most part, our words exactly. And so at that point, we decided to contact one of the humanities editors at Routledge, which is owned by Taylor and Francis now. And we did that through a lawyer because we were worried we might say something that could get us into more trouble. And so we wrote the letters, but they came from someone we knew who was a lawyer. And so in that first letter, we basically conveyed our shock at what we discovered, especially in the Auslander book, Theory for Performance Studies. None of these books, by the way, credit us anywhere. We hadn't gotten any royalty checks, but that really, honestly, didn't matter. It's not very much at all, but none of the books mention us anywhere. Actually, Theory for Education, I think, the authors put a footnote in there saying that it's based on our book. But so we contact them and we say what I've just said, basically, and this is her response in the editor's response in that first. I think I can read this. In that first, I was asked if I was allowed to read this letter back. In the first back and forth, our clients recognized that they granted Routledge the right to use the book. Oh, this is our letter to her. Sorry, to use the book as a basis and source for subsequent books in the series. The intention was clear through all of the discussions in the language of the letter agreement that this right was granted to build uniformity and consistency into the series, while appropriately crediting Mr. Deal and Mr. Beal as the source of the original volume. No credible interpretation of revise, adapt, delete, or supplement within the discourse of academic publishing can justify the copy and paste use of the book. In no way did our clients ever grant the right to be shamelessly plagiarized. As you can surely understand, Mr. Beal and Mr. Deal, their professional status and value as scholars depends primarily on the academic work that they publish. Indeed, the very integrity of higher education and academic research depends on the integrity of authorship and the maintenance of strict standards of quotation, citation, and credit. Any student in any university would surely be expelled for producing a work of such flagrant plagiarism as Theory for Performance Studies. That's what we wrote. The first response then to that, clearly totally remiss in failing to credit them. Sorry for that. We'll get those back royalties to you. But then on to the substantive issue. The issue of claimed plagiarism is not, I think, so straightforward, the editor writes. I think that the phrasing of the contract is revise, adapt. You've already heard that. Revise, adapt, delete, supplement. Can certainly be interpreted to mean that the text of religious studies may be used as the basis for other books in the series. The classics and performance authors freely acknowledge that they have kept a great deal, they don't acknowledge that anywhere, of the original text unchanged, and I set out below what is new, and she kind of itemizes it all. And insists that this was the idea from the very beginning, that what is in Theory for Performance Studies is what was always to be expected. She says at the end, clearly the major fault has been not to make any acknowledgement of the original text. And I'm thinking, now how do we define plagiarism? Isn't it using a text and not properly acknowledging it? But she says it's not plagiarism, but the problem was that they didn't acknowledge the original text. Our response: we find it hard to believe that anyone in academic publishing would accept your interpretation of the letter of agreement concerning Routledge's use of Professor Beal and Deal's work. Certainly none of the actual parties to the agreement, including Mr. Germano, understood it that way. We acknowledge that the agreement should have been more specific in delineating exactly how far their book could be used by Routledge and its other authors as a basis for subsequent books in the series, but the clear intention in all my clients' discussions with Mr. Germano was that their book would be a template for subsequent subsequent books in order to provide consistency to the series. The intent was never that their text would be copied in large blocks and pasted into other books to be published under other authors' names. That is ghostwriting. My clients would never have agreed to give the text away like that, especially for such meager credit and payment. It was just a little line on the copyright page was where the credit was going to be. Indeed, if this were the intention, they would have insisted on being listed as co-authors or co-editors, and look at the books ahead of time, too. This was never never even discussed, because they never imagined that Routledge or any other or another author would agree to such a practice. We encourage you to look more closely at the performance book. The author's wholesale copying of my client's text in the introduction and throughout is much more extensive than you acknowledge in your email. It's hard to imagine how anyone could consider it authorship by any scholarly standards. And we go on to say, maybe it's not a legal matter, given what we signed, but it certainly is a professional, ethical scandal, if it's not a legal scandal. And so we basically gave up at that point in talking with them. But when the Chronicle of Higher Education was interested in the story, we were happy to talk with them, and it went on from there. So we're glad, I think, that at least there's this opportunity to make this an occasion for talking about academic standards. How did you describe it? Social norms. Social norms, in addition to legal norms. I will, with that, hand it over to Bill.
Tim and I have come to think of ourselves, I think, as academic ghostwriters. It's just that there's not much money in it, unfortunately. Otherwise, that might be a career move. I'm not sure. I want to just talk a little bit about the structure of the book and our book and the subsequent books. But I thought I should tell you that about the same time that actually Routledge sent this book to me, I guess they thought, it's in the series, I should see it. So I was pretty shocked to open it up and see how much plagiarism was there. When I was going back between the two books, I couldn't tell which book was which. It was a very, very bizarre kind of experience and feeling and all of that. But around the same time, we got a letter from Routledge, which was now being based in London, asking if we had a copy of the contract, that they couldn't find theirs. So, as pathetic as that may be, clearly Tim and I got caught in this transition, this changeover in this company, things that we could never have anticipated, it seems to me. But on the other hand, what happened was so egregious, it's hard to imagine that editors at a major academic publisher, would have apparently paid so little attention to what in fact was going on. Tim mentioned just briefly that there would appear to have been some sort of a disc going around with our text on it. And in a minute, I'll tell you why I think that is also most likely the case. Not least of which is if you're going to go in and change we to I, right? It seems to me that if you were reading the text, more changes would get in there just as part of the process of writing it, and clearly that didn't happen. Is this on? Do I have to turn this on?
I have to flip it on.
Is it on?
Yep.
Okay. Tim had mentioned, this idea that our book was going to be the basis for these subsequent volumes, and that our expectation was that maybe some of the biographical part might stay the same, or would at least be close enough that one wouldn't read that Freud was, born in France as opposed to, some other place, right? So there'd be some consistency there, but there might also be some consistency in terms of the keywords, the major concepts that we were dealing with. But our thought was always that, of course, if somebody in education or performance studies or whatever is dealing with a particular concept, their own discipline will have its own particular ways of dealing with that concept. It was never our thought that, you take these theoretical concepts and kind of one size fits all. That was never what we thought. So that was also very, very peculiar to us. I don't know how well you can see this, but our book is listed over here on the far left, and it shows the structure. We have these four predecessors who were very important to the theorists then that we dealt with. You can see in subsequent volumes there's been, for example, in Theory for Art History, there's been some things taken out and some things added, which is what we would have expected, because again, not every field is going to deal with the same theorists in the same way. Theory for Education was particularly, I think, good at doing this. Theory for performance studies is where things really go bad. I mean, and so that the Auslander book, Theory for Performance Studies, really has become sort of the poster child for the whole plagiarism of all of this. Theory for Classics changes not all that much. So although there's been a great deal of focus on Theory for Performance Studies, really in some ways all 4 of the subsequent volumes have problems with them. One thing that I noticed when I started going through these, and this is more evidence for the theory of the circulating disk, was that Theory for Art History adds the theorists Adorno and Heidegger. Adorno and Heidegger, who are not in ours, interestingly make it into Theory for Classics. And if you compare the text of theory of Adorno and Heidegger in Theory for Art History, it's almost verbatim following up in Theory for Classics. So this is like plagiarism within plagiarism. It's just so complicated. It's really quite remarkable in that way. So there is that. The other issue, and this is something we're hoping that Ray will talk about, or some of you might want to talk about. It was never seemed odd to us that copyright would be in the name of Taylor and Francis. That was a fairly common thing to do. And so the 3 books that were published in New York, ours, Art History and Education, all bear Taylor and Francis as a copyright. One of the things that made my stomach turn over when I first saw the Theory for Performance Studies was not only had it plagiarized us, like 80, 90%, but he's owning the copyright. So it's like now I have plagiarized his book. I mean, I don't know how that works exactly. I suspect copyright doesn't actually mean very much, but so the 2 British versions have copyright in the supposed author's name. So there's that going on as well. Taylor and Francis are the current owners of Routledge. They bought out Routledge. Is that right, Tim?
Yeah,
Yeah. If you look at, to buy one of these books on Amazon.com now, after Tim and I wrote these letters or had the lawyers send these letters to Routledge, very quickly there appeared on Amazon and Barnes & Noble this edition saying adapted from Deal and Beal, right? And in a copy of Theory for Performance Studies, which I just got, I figured I'd go ahead and buy it because I'm making royalties off of it, right? There is now an addendum, and it was not in the first ones that came out. It says, and you can see it's this nicely done, hand-sewn, leather-bound addendum. It says, Theory for Performance Studies is adapted from Theory for Religious Studies by William E. Deal and Timothy K. Beal. The publishers accept full responsibility for failure to ensure proper credit in the first edition of this work. This in no way reflects on the work undertaken by the author on behalf of the publisher. So Tim and I sort of feel stuck in this do loop of we signed this contract and therefore we can do whatever we want with your text. And I don't know if that is in fact the case. We certainly feel like we wouldn't permit our students to do this. We can't imagine that any credible author, academic author, would want their name associated with a text like this. What's curious about Auslander, we've never met him, we have no particular animosity towards him, but he's a very well-known person in his field, and it's not as if he needed this book for any particular purpose. I think he's a full professor. He's certainly a tenured professor. He's got several books. He's well-known in performance studies. And so it's just, we're astounded that anybody would actually do this, and why you would think that if you have this contract that's somehow protection or safety from the responsibility for the fact that you effectively copied somebody else's work and are now calling it your own. It's hard for us to get past that. So as Tim and I have said all along, there may be no legal grounds for us, but there certainly is the larger ethical issue of what has gone on here. I think I would just close here because we'd like to have this really be a conversation. I think Tim and I are both willing to acknowledge that certainly in retrospect we were pretty naive. I mean, we clearly should not have signed this addendum to our contract saying that it could be used, certainly to be used in ways we didn't expect. But on the other hand, we're academics and we don't expect much out of our in terms of, this wasn't a monetary issue. It was really, we thought this was a great idea for a series, and it didn't turn out the way we had thought. So I will leave it, I think, at that.
Did you have to do this in British or in American course?
We didn't do anything in any courts.
If you had.
Oh, that's a good question, because the first three are, well, you probably know better. The first three are Routledge, New York, and the next two are Routledge, London. They have two offices like most presses do. What do you think?
Well, since you created it here, the work is going to be governed mostly by U.S. law, and so if I don't really, going to Britain might give you some benefits in terms of defamation, where they're a little more protective of the reputation of individuals than we are, given our propensity to care about free speech. But yeah, in terms of copyright law, it really shouldn't have made that much of a difference.
Tell us a little bit more about what's happened since the Chronicle thing appeared, or actually, I didn't see the Chronicle thing, so what is the profession actually picking this
well,
up and just debating it, or, I mean, in some ways, this is just, I mean, it's really old hat. This has been going on for hundreds of years, back to the printing press.
yeah. It's easier with digital, though, networked culture, I think. Not much in academic religious studies has come about in terms of public debate, but in performance studies, Richard Schechner, who is the editor of the Drama Review, which is, I think, one of the main, TDR is one of the main, if not the main, academic journal in that field, put together, well, at their conference, he had a session on this issue, and then put together a comment section about 45, 50 pages in the forthcoming issue of the Drama Review, where he interviews us and we give him more details. He writes a piece, and then there are also pieces by a number of the editorial board members of the Drama Review, including Peggy Phelan and Judith Butler, a number of other fairly prominent people, sort of thinking about it, other dimensions of it. That's what we know about so far.
What are the dimensions that what do they say?
What?
I mean, it's kind of a shaming of Auslander, or is
No,
it a deeper
no.
kind of inquiry?
Well, I think Schechner was deeply concerned that Routledge would have allowed this, and that Routledge was not taking responsibility, because they've published. I guess he sees, and maybe this, I don't know this for a fact, but from my understanding of what he said, Routledge has really been one of the primary publishers for people in performance studies. Auslander has published with Routledge before, certainly Schechner has, and he was effectively calling for people to boycott Routledge. Auslander was an associate editor for TDR, and he was, of course, not happy with Philip, his colleague, for having done this. We received about a month ago an email from this same editor at Routledge informing us that Auslander had requested that his book be removed from sale, and we were told, and that the remaining copies would be pulped. The remaining copies in their warehouses would be pulped. And I think Tim and I, our response was, what took you so long? I mean, why did you wait until this discredited author has asked you to do this? I mean, none of it just makes any sense from the perspective of academic writing and this whole ethical issue of plagiarism.
I'm just curious about copyright law. It seems like there must be some implicit rights that the authors retain that cannot be interpreted away. This seems like such a violation of normal academic norms that you would have to deliberately sign them away to allow this to be consistent with copyright law. Am I mistaken? Are there things that you have to explicitly sign away unless otherwise they're assumed not to be valid?
Unfortunately, in the United States, the answer is there are no other. If you sign away your rights, you sign away all your rights, right? So that's in comparison with some European nations who believe in the moral rights of authors as well. So if we were in a moral rights regime, the fact that both Tim and Bill here weren't credited, or if their work had been used in a way that actually brought discredit on them as well, they would still have another legal claim. But in the United States, our the copyright law is essentially an economic right. And both Martha and I have complained throughout our careers that it's arguably an economic right that generally favors publishers, and the authors play a very small role in it in the end, which is why whenever I speak to anyone about this, don't sign away your copyright. Most publishers are actually quite happy to allow the author to retain their copyright as long as they get certain benefits and rights along with it. Usually the right of first publication, usually the ability to take the work and translate it into an electronic format or any other potential format. This is a rare instance, right, where they're really thinking about producing a whole series of works based on that. And so in some ways that clause that they had was quite standard for that. I mean, anyone here who's published textbooks with co-authors know that our publishing agreements often include those similar clauses, because what happens when co-authors decide to split up or go separate ways, you don't want the book to just die as a result of an inability of the co-authors to agree on what to do next. So in some ways, what Routledge did initially was clearly within the practice of the publishing industry. I think what happened in the end was a rather extreme interpretation of the contractual rights. And so, yeah, they could have fought it, but given the stakes here, other than their academic reputation, which they were able to correctly and I think appropriately vindicate in other forums, the lawsuit wouldn't have made too much sense.
I have a non-legal response, which is that it never occurred to us that this was an issue, that somehow, we need to worry about the fact that somebody might just take it and just republish the book in their own name. So it just in terms of, as you say, sort of the academic standard, it just never occurred to us that this was an issue. I think that there's also the issue of how do you interpret, I forget what the language is here, but to change or retain or to modify or whatever. Even hearing that now, I don't go, oh, and that means you can just copy me, So there's that. But the other thing is, it seems to me that there's also something rather deceptive going on here, which is that here's Routledge selling all of these books, which are effectively the same, or to some extent the same. Maybe they should just have one book called Theory for the Humanities or something, because there's this suggestion that these are different books, and they're not.
I just want to intervene once more. Isn't that a little romantic of you?
Yes.
I mean, we're living in a
retrospect.
world of incredible text self-generation. That goes back to like the Stratemeyer syndicate, right? Where the Tom Swift novels create this template, and then you just plug in a series of authors to generate yet a new novel. And so I wonder, Auslander, could he have imagined himself in such a syndicate sort of situation, so that he didn't feel that this was in any way affecting his academic credibility? I mean,
we wondered that initially, especially since he's in performance studies, and who knows what kind of a
fantasy life he lives in. We don't know.
But based on the things he said in his defense in interviews we've read, because we've never talked with him, I would say no. I think he defends himself on the same kinds of grounds that these romantic ones that are illusory.
Well, my question follows from that, and that is, what has he said, and what has his institution said?
It's hard to know what the institution has said. I mean, we don't have any connection to him. I wouldn't be surprised if the request to have the book pulped might be some aftermath of some sort of review from a committee or something, but at the university, I'm not sure. I don't have any news about that. Do you?
You don't want to mention that thing?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what has he said about why I did this, or I didn't do anything?
Well, we only know from what he was quoted in the Chronicle, and he said, I don't think I did anything wrong.
One thing that makes me wonder, when I read this little addendum in here, this erratum or whatever they want to call it, the publishers accept full responsibility for failure to ensure proper credit in the first edition of this work. This in no way reflects on the work undertaken by the author on behalf of the publisher. That's not for us, that's for him. And when I read that, it's because he has confronted them, perhaps legally, for not doing their part and putting the citation of us in there, and thereby getting him, he might say, in trouble, because he's saying, well, I thought that the book was going to be clearly described as mostly their book with my sort of redactional changes here and there.
Yeah, he has publicly, I mean, he did say that
So
as
maybe
well.
he threatened to sue
He
them,
did
I
say,
don't know.
I don't think I did anything wrong, and he did also say, Tim's quite right, that I think it was in the, must have been in the Chronicle article,
Yeah.
that from his point of view, it was the publisher's responsibility for putting in the notice about where this book was really coming from. I'm not sure my response would have been any different had there been a statement saying, this is adapted from. Maybe I would have felt a little bit better, but I think I still would have said, this was my idea of adaptation, right? So I mean, there's still that, and we're naive. So.
Okay.
I had a question. Did any of the other authors agree to have their books pulled or pulped or anything like that?
I have no idea.
No.
No, we've never been in touch with any of the authors at all.
Okay, so they also didn't feel any kind of moral right that this is just wrong kind of thing.
It's a good question. The first one, Theory for Education, actually makes, isn't it education? Makes credits us. I think it's in that one at the end of the introduction. There's a long note saying the task here. The task at hand here is there's no credit from the publisher to us, but the authors did. And in fact, this is also more like this is certainly what we had in mind when you look at this book. It's revised.
It's
much
the middle
more,
one on the
much
chart.
more
You can see that
extensively.
they really have attempted to adapt this to their own field.
Yeah. The task at hand was to rewrite the excellent first volume in Routledge's Theory 4 series, Theory for Religious Studies. In some cases, we preserved most of the entry's narrative, only adding remarks, sometimes brief and sometimes longer, about the particular importance of their work for the field of education. This includes the predecessors, Freud, Marx, Saussure, and theorists like Bakhtin, Bourdieu, Butler, Deleuze, and so on. In some cases, these entries were almost wholly rewritten, as in the case of Bakhtin. In most others, they were revised only to address concerns of those in education. We also added new entries that are key for education: Basil Bernstein, Jerome Brunner, John Dewey, Paulo Freire, I don't ever know how to pronounce that name, Clifford Geertz, Antonio Gramsci, Stuart Hall, Bell Hooks, Jean Piaget, and Lev Vygotsky. So you can see, much more extensive, and even with that, trying to be responsible in that way, the revisions from sentence to sentence and line to line are much more extensive here as well. So. And this was the one closest to publication the publication of our book. My guess is this is the one that had the most supervision from Bill Germano before he left, and these sort of got farmed out to different departmental editors who probably didn't even know that there was a series.
This is certainly a horrible story. I appreciate the value of your presenting this, but I'm looking ahead a little bit to the future. I edit one of the most prominent journals in my field, and we're very concerned about the contracts we have with MIT and with the University of Chicago. We've tried to fashion language that protects on both sides and been pretty scrupulous, we think, in that conversation, both the publisher and myself. And the authors that publish with us seem to feel comfortable. Do you have any thoughts about further protection, though, with regard to copyright law or your own experiences?
Well, it was ironic. At the beginning of this session, we were handed the contracts for releasing the content to to Digital Case, and we didn't. None of us, I think, not one of us read it. we just signed it. So once again, we trust Gina and Joanne. I think one of the lessons for me is to have a copy, if I can afford it, to have a copyright lawyer or a literary agent look over a contract first before I sign it. That can cost a little bit, and I think that there's some conversation about that becoming something that the library may take on, a consultant kind of role for looking over contracts with the author's interest in mind. One big lesson for me is that you're not making a deal with, when you sign a contract, it's not with the editor whom you love and trust and have this understanding with. It's with a big company. And this whole thing about textbooks and what you were just saying, Ray, that happens in the textbook industry. That's interesting because Taylor and Francis does a lot more with textbooks. Routledge hasn't done as much, and so we may have been using a boilerplate from the Taylor and Francis end for this agreement. What about you, Bill?
Oh, I think for me personally, there was a kind of a tension here. Now, again, this is all in retrospect. I don't think I was fully conscious of this at the time, but this was my first book. I really wanted to publish this book. It was really important to me. I really cared about the subject matter, and frankly, the contract. I mean, the business end of this, or the business side of this, it really wasn't what I was focused on. And as Tim has said, we trusted and still do trust Bill Germano. None of this ever seemed like an issue, and which is why when this has become what it's become, there was just no way to anticipate it. But really, just that my own personal focus anyway was really on the fact that here I finally put together the scholarship and it was going to get published by a decent press, and I was very excited about that. And again, I just had no reason to think there was a problem in terms of the contract. I know better now.
Mm-hmm. And in following up on that, I'm sorry, were you about to say?
No, go ahead.
In the culture of academic publishing, publishing books is an important part of our capital. It's valued professionally, and I think most academic authors really do feel beholden to the publishers, and there's been a little bit of a kind of contagion around us by complaining about a prominent academic publisher. Some others who have published with Routledge don't really want to hear this, and some who are hoping to get a contract don't really want to hear this because they want to feel good about the publisher, and there is a sort of there is that sense of being beholden to academic publishers and just afraid to do anything with a contract that might make them have second thoughts and walk away from it.
Yeah, in terms of law changes, I mean, what we have to keep in mind is copyright's a default set of rules, and there's a lot we can do with our negotiations. Ironically, though, the group of copyright law professors and internet law professors, it really wasn't until a couple of years ago that we started comparing notes on what kind of publishing agreements we were signing and what kind of requests we were getting. And some of them, they were all over the place, right? Some of them requested that we signed the complete copyright away, that all future rights were given away. I remember negotiating with an editor at one point that said, you're asking me that if at some point I want to write a book or create a movie out of this article that I'm giving to you, that you own the right to that. And a lot of the times they don't even recognize that's what they're requesting. And so what we tended to do is informally, and it's something that I would recommend around here, is informally share the terms of the contracts that people have had successfully negotiated. The Creative Commons is another place I would recommend that any author go to. So this is a group established by Harvard that basically gives people contracts for licensing their copyrighted works. Like what do I want from other people if they're to use my work? And you'll often see for the Creative Commons instances, it's just acknowledgement is the main thing. Right? Many of us are more than happy to have our work acknowledged, used and referred to. In fact, please, right? We want that to happen. And it's just the acknowledgement. And so the Creative Commons provides a kind of very easy way to start thinking about that in kind of online, user-friendly terms. The other things that have been proposed in the U.S. is to strengthen moral rights in the United States. And so, in fact, a couple of years back, visual artists now have moral rights in the United States. Right? So if you create an original work of visual art or one in limited edition, some of the rights that Europeans recognize in terms of the moral rights of the author are recognized in the United States. Book authors, we're in a worse position.
Ask real fast, and this is going to sound like a joke, but I'm serious. Do you list all 5 of these on your CV? Just to acknowledge them so that other people don't go, well, this, someone ran across the other book, and then, to protect yourself, do you somehow are going to list that?
I don't personally, but I only wrote one book, so,
And on the other half, I was going to ask from an ethics perspective, what if they'd have come to you and said, you know what, we want to republish your book as Theory for Performance Studies, as is your name, no other author? What would your response to them have been?
Why?
Why? And I mean, we'd have to have had a discussion about it. But my first reaction would be no.
Yeah,
that
me
it's
too.
not. It's not that we're not authors in that romantic sense of having any authority in that field. And I don't feel that it would be justifiable. And that is one of the things I think that's being discussed in the TDR issue is this, you know, how could a book that's almost identical to, you know, to one for religious studies just be carried over into performance studies and anybody take it seriously? What does that say about the definition of the field?
There's something that really puzzles me about this whole business. And you know, they say that one of the most fundamental drives that people have is to edit other people's words. Okay? And in academia, we do that. Now, when these authors like Auslander took entire chunks, I mean, I can't imagine my doing that without being tempted to change things to fit my writing style. Whatever, right? If I was doing Shakespeare, I'd be tempted to change his words.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
It's improve, right? I mean, that's such a human. The fact that
Especially-
they didn't do that seems.
Well, that's the theory of the circulating disc, because
Yeah.
obviously you would do that.
But even, I mean, if they insert a paragraph in between, say you have 4 paragraphs and they insert their own paragraph, just to make continuity, I personally would find it very hard to just insert a chunk of my own writing in somebody else's writing. It wouldn't flow. It wouldn't mean. I mean, I don't know how they had the discipline not to change more of your.
Yeah. This is all kind of redaction criticism, but I was wondering if maybe part of it was research assistants or something, you know, students who were given assignments and they were to go through and that they didn't do very much at all. And then they didn't have that same attachment to, you know, a concern about the text, about having any integrity in relation to the text.
Can I just ask, Mono's point, that wouldn't have satisfied you, would it, if they had done a little bit more sophisticated job of using your stuff? That's what I thought. See, it's a matter of credit here, that's what
Right.
we're dealing with, right?
Yeah.
You need, want credit because that's how you get your rewards at your institution and in your profession. So it's not a copyright issue at all.
Right. We just don't know what language to use, and so we go to copyright, I guess.
I had a thought and a question. My thought would be, I would imagine it's got to be kind of frustrating for this book, which originally started off as something that you were very proud of, this accomplishment, and you know, a reflection of your scholarly work, and then it takes on this whole meaning, becomes a whole new meaning, and takes on a probably identity of source of frustration and hassle and all these other negative things in life. My question is, has the book, do you think, been tarnished by this? How is it doing in terms of, I guess, its sales? I mean, do you think that professors are staying away from it as a resource guide because of all this, or maybe it's more interesting now because of all this kind of fallout, or maybe it really hasn't had any impact? I'm not sure.
I think it's really hard to know, because it's hard to know. For example, there is another Routledge book, interestingly enough, on sort of an introduction to religion. Not theorists, not the kind of thing we did at all. Very, very, very different. But it in its suggested readings, and at the end of each chapter, almost invariably always says, "Well, look at these particular theorists in Deal and Beal," right? But I don't know when that made it into that particular book. This really only just sort of broke over, I guess, the summer, really, right? So that part's really, I think, is really hard for us to know whether it's had that much of an impact or not. But going back to your sort of the pride of authorship, has that been tarnished? I mean, at this point, I'd be very happy to take it and just put it online and let people comment and just throw it out there. Everybody else play with it too, right? I mean, I don't need it anymore in the sense of tenure or something like that. Yeah, I mean, it really has, I mean, I think Tim and I both feel that the whole thing is, just wish it would go away.
It probably does, it probably has an effect on the marketing. I mean, my guess is that that the press is doing very little to market the book at this point. So in that regard, it could affect sales. I doubt it's in any of the new Routledge religion catalogs, for example, even though it obviously should be. I'm not sure about that.
If there was anything that you could suggest after going through this that might help others for prevent this from happening, is there any ideas that you have, either based at the university level, based on how publishing companies should, anything?
Well, I don't know what publishing companies should do, but I do think it reminds me of when I first started teaching after I got my PhD, realizing that, oh my God, nobody ever taught me how to teach. They just taught me how to do research, right? Well, nobody ever taught me how to publish either, right? And I think that it would make sense for this university, any university, to have some sort of a facility. I know Joanna's interested in this now in the library, and we will all owe you a great debt if this comes to pass, because maybe a lot of this could have been avoided if we'd had even a little bit of advice about what contracts are and what they mean. Some of the stuff that that Ray has talked with us about subsequently. So I guess my feeling is more, I have no control over the publishers per se, but it would be nice if universities helped train their faculty on some of the pitfalls to all this, especially since it's so clearly expected of us to be involved in research and publishing.
Why would we suggest what you should do, your next book, you should be writing about your experience?
All right, it's just about 1:30, which is when we had wanted to wrap this up, so maybe that'll be the last question. I think you end on a good note. This has been a concern of the library, and I think it's going to be an ongoing concern of the library, and there'll be more of these kind of series, hopefully not any more of these kind of incidences. But at any rate, we'd like to thank you all very much for coming, and we hope to see you at further discussions of this sort as we witness the publishing field changing as radically as it is. So anyway, thank you and have a good weekend.